Welcome back. The United Arab Emirates, UAE, is seeking to strengthen ties with Russia. President Sheikh Mohammed made this known to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of a forum in St. Petersburg today. The UAE is one of the countries which has not joined Western sanctions against Moscow concerning Ukraine. The Middle East economic powerhouse has sought to maintain what it says is a neutral position on the conflict. After the meeting, Sheikh Mohammed tweeted that the UAE continues to support all efforts aimed at reaching a political solution through dialogue and diplomacy towards global peace and stability. Mr. Putin had earlier thanked the president for his efforts on freeing prisoners of war in Ukraine. And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken would be going to Beijing this weekend to hold meetings. Analysts say expectations are low that he will make headway on the long list of disputes between the United States and China. But he and his Chinese counterparts can achieve at least one thing, say analysts, show that the world's most important bilateral relationship is not about to fall off the rails. Mr. Blinken will hold meetings in China on June 18th to the 19th and may meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. He will be the highest-ranking U.S. government official to visit China since President Biden took office in January 2021. Meanwhile, the Chinese Foreign Ministry say that China's door to dialogue with the U.S. is always open and communications between the two countries have never stopped. Speaking at a press briefing, spokesperson Wang Wenbin says China and the U.S. must develop relations on the basis of mutual respect and equality in response to a question regarding U.S. officials' low expectations on Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit. Officials said on Wednesday that Washington is not expecting a long list of deliverables when Secretary of State visits China, but hopes to keep high-level communication channels with Beijing open to reduce the risk that competition with Beijing veers into conflict. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent joins me now, Maria Bird. Hi, Maria. I mean, this is quite interesting, this visit, high-level visit from the Biden administration to China. I mean, what is the long list of things that he will be discussing surrounding this visit?
Well, this visit is one that's going to be very direct, very straightforward. I think that after the balloon incident here in the United States, Secretary Blinken is expected to definitely discuss how that was unacceptable in the U.S.'s opinion and kind of the security concerns around that. And so what we know is that it's going to be a very candid conversation. So that's what we can definitely expect over this discussion between the U.S. and China. And it's one that hopefully will, as you stated before, continue to open the doors for further conversations around trade. There's so many issues that the U.S. and China have to tackle that have not been tackled as a result of this strained relationship.
And perhaps not just that, there's also the question of Taiwan in this mix, isn't there?
Yes, and we know the U.S. has been very outspoken on the humanity issues as it relates to that. The U.S. has been very clear that they don't agree with some of the way in which China has dealt with Taiwan. And so humanity and the human rights issues that exist between the two, I think, are going to continue to be part of the conversation. But I don't know if the U.S. is going to definitely back down from that. So will that create additional tension? And will that potentially halt further conversations around progress with foreign relations and specifically economic trade?
Let's also not forget what's going on in Ukraine with Russia's invasion and, you know, where China has put itself a bit neutral. But how are Americans reacting to this visit by Mr. Blinken?
I think the Americans are expecting it. We were supposed to visit, as we know, in February. I think that the U.S. right now, we're dealing with some economic challenges. The economy shows signs of strength, but also has had an up and down season, and we're still dealing with some inflation issues. And so I think that the more we can open up the doors for trade and increase our trade relationships with countries across the world, and obviously we know that China has always been a strong supplier of U.S. goods, and obviously the U.S. has as well for China.
When you think of the bilateral ties between the U.S. and China, and this is during Biden's time, and you compare it to President Trump's time, would you say they're pretty much the same, better or worse?
If you look at really from a statistics perspective on what's happened as far as trade relations, we don't see any progress, I think is really the question, is there progress in the relationship? Have we seen some of the areas that the U.S. has been very much vocal about, whether it's human rights, whether or not it's increasing the trade relationships, whether or not it's trying to create relationships that are best for the entire global community, not just the U.S. and China. I think those issues are ones that Americans are looking for a greater stance on, and we have not necessarily seen great progress in that area. Are we a little bit friendlier? Potentially. We see the Blinken is there now, but things as we've seen before with the balloon incident does not necessarily say that things are any different than they were in the previous administration.
And perhaps, Maria, as well, with regards to this visit by Mr. Blinken, we understand that, he's also hoping to establish some sort of relationship and, so there's no miscalculation, misconception whatsoever. But things could actually deteriorate with this visit, couldn't they?
Potentially, if China doesn't respond to some of the very clear and direct conversations that Secretary Blinken will have, if it becomes a back and forth contentious conversation that then leads to further dialogue after the visit, I think that we could see tension there. But the hope is that the exercise of Secretary Blinken visiting China, China being open to the visit, is hopes that there will be progress in the relationship toward positive movement.
Maria, thanks for that update. Authorities in Greece have arrested 9 suspected people smugglers in connection with the deadly sinking of a migrant boat off the coast of Greece on Tuesday. All the arrested people are Egyptian nationals. Relatives of people who were on board have been gathering in the port city of Kalamata, hoping to find family members. More than 100 people have been rescued, but nearly 80 have died, and up to 600 are still missing. Survivors of a deadly shipwreck off the coast of Greece have left the port for a migrant camp outside of Athens, and dozens of migrants had been sheltered and cared for in the warehouse at the port by aid workers and emergency services staff since being brought to shore by Coast Guard officials after the boat carrying hundreds sank off the Greek coast. The migrants boarded buses for a migrant camp in Malakassa, some 40 kilometers northeast of Athens, which opened in 2016 to accommodate migrants that had arrived in the country primarily from Turkey. In the meantime, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights is calling for an investigation of people smugglers and also human traffickers after at least 78 migrants were killed in the shipwreck off the coast of Greece. 9 people have been arrested over the shipwreck this week in connection with the vessel. Greece is one of the main routes into the European Union for refugees and migrants from the Middle East, Asia, and also Africa.
What happened on Wednesday underscores the need to investigate people smugglers and human traffickers and ensure they are brought to justice. The High Commissioner reiterated his call to states to open up more regular migration channels, enhance responsibility sharing, ensure arrangements for the safe and timely disembarkation of all people rescued at sea, and the establishment of independent monitoring and oversight of migration-related policies and practices.
India's west coast has been battered by a severe cyclone as strong winds and torrential rain caused widespread destruction, leaving at least 2 people dead. Fire department workers are seen using chainsaws and excavators to remove fallen tree trunks which blocked roads as gale force winds caused hundreds of trees to be uprooted in the coastal areas of Gujarat. 2 men, both shepherds, had died while trying to rescue their cattle from being swept away during heavy rainfall and flood in Gujarat's Banagar district. Cyclone Biparjoy had weakened to a cyclonic storm from a severe cyclonic storm Friday morning. India's meteorological department says with speeds going down from 105 km to 85, wind speeds are expected to reduce further by afternoon, but heavy rain is expected to continue throughout Friday. Well, over in the U.S., the Texas Panhandle town of Perryton was struck by one or more tornadoes, causing fatalities. Images from the ground showed much of the town, which may have been struck by 3 tornadoes left in rubble by the twister. Mayor Kerry Simmons said the twister caused deaths in Perryton, which has a population of about 8,000, but he would not say how many fatalities until Friday. Later, trailer homes were torn apart and left in rubble, while public infrastructure such as utility poles and telephone lines were broken, bringing traffic in some areas to a standstill. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has unveiled his country's first national security strategy. It's a plan long in the making, and it aims to keep the government from repeating past mistakes, including embarrassing missteps from the German government. Calling Russia the biggest threat to Europe, Germany is also warning about growing rivalry with China as Beijing tries to use its economic might to achieve political goals. The document provides an overview of Berlin's foreign policy, which has shifted towards prioritizing security more over economic interests in the year and a half since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It also addressed threats from climate change to supply chain disruptions. Well, for more, we've been joined by Deutsche Welle's Cassandra Sund. Hi, Cassandra. This is Germany's first national security strategy, but why now?
That's right. While the German government has in the past presented policy documents covering security, this move is designed to be a dedicated and comprehensive strategy that brings different parts of the government together. And the biggest reason for this is the Russian war in Ukraine. Scholz made this very clear when presenting the document that the security conditions for Germany have changed since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. The war exposed weaknesses in the German military. It also showed the country's over-reliance on Russia for energy. This was seen by many as an embarrassing mistake for the German government because Russia skeptics, including U.S. and European Union government officials, had criticized the Nord Stream deals, for example, for years. But for decades, Germany has been applying this change through trade strategy called here Wandel durch Handel, which means closer economic ties with countries like Russia could mean better foreign policy relations. But the consequence, in hindsight, was a large German dependence on Russian gas, coal, and oil. Now, additionally, the war raised questions over how critical infrastructure like gas pipelines, especially in remote areas, could be protected. So not only did the Russian invasion of Ukraine put a spotlight on the necessity of a comprehensive defensive plan, but energy sanctions on Russia and the destruction of critical infrastructure like the Nord Stream pipelines put a new worry in the minds of many Germans that their economy and lifestyle may not be as safe as previously thought.
And Cassandra, what more does the strategy say?
Scholz said that the core task of the state is to ensure security, and that over the past year and a half, events, specifically the war, have made clear where things need to improve. Now, in this 76-page document, Germany enshrined a NATO commitment to spend at least 2% of its gross domestic product on defense. That's going to be welcome news to some NATO allies, and that figure could be reached by 2024. But as a result, money will be taken from other parts of the government to fund defense. Now, another big topic outlined is, no surprise, the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, Russia was named as the biggest threat to peace in the Euro-Atlantic area, and the government strategy emphasized that Russia is trying to destabilize European democracies and weaken the European Union and NATO. Scholz added that it's important to continue to discuss security guarantees for Ukraine, including after the war ends. Germany will also aim to promote projects to shore up strategic reserves and create incentives for firms to hold reserves. The government is aiming to reduce one-sided dependencies in energy, raw materials, and the like through diversification of supplies. There's this idea of integrated German security. That protection comes through resilience, especially in the face of climate change. The new strategy emphasizes that food and raw materials policies are also security policies. And one last important note is how the strategy outlined the ways in which China is a rival for Germany. It pointed out that China is increasingly putting pressure on regional stability and disrespecting human rights, and that China is using its economic weight to reach political goals.
And China might be the surprising mention, especially when the war in Ukraine, is right in Germany's backyard. Can you tell us more about the concerns, and this is coming from the German government, surrounding the world's second largest economy?
Well, economies here are a big part of the story. China is the world's second largest economy, and China has been Germany's largest trading partner for 7 years in a row. So there are concerns that China's economic pressures could be used against Germany. But at the same time, the German government has said that China remains a partner without which, quote, we cannot solve many global challenges. Now, a separate China strategy is coming soon, according to the government. China was mentioned in this strategic document, but that part was fairly short. And meanwhile, Berlin is hosting senior Chinese officials next week. The high-level talks between Chinese and German officials are expected to touch on numerous sensitive issues.
All right, Deutsche Welle correspondent Cassandra Sant for us there from Berlin. Many thanks. Still ahead on the program. Pope Francis leaves hospital, arrived at the Vatican after surgery. We have details. And faithful were relieved today after Pope Francis was discharged from hospital 9 days after surgery to repair an abdominal hernia. The Vatican said he would recite his noon prayer on Sunday, June the 18th in St. Peter's Square and resume private audiences next week, but would skip the Wednesday, that's June the 21st, general audience in the square to safeguard his post-operative recovery. When he reached the Vatican gate, he briefly got out of his car and, standing for a minute, individually thanked members of the Italian police escort. The Pope traditionally takes all of July off, with the Sunday blessings his only public appearances, so he will have next month to rest before his trips.
Yes, we were aware that Pope was in a hospital. It was really hard to hear that he was feeling sick, because it seems like a really nice man, a real nice human. So we're very glad to hear that he's feeling better and he's coming home.
And he's an elderly man who may pick up infection more quickly than others, and he's out there in the public forum. Maybe they need to protect him from all the other germs that are going around.
Right now in Sudan, where the country has rejected Kenya's leadership of a delegation set up by a regional bloc, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, to mediate in the fighting. The Pan-Arab Al Arabiya television channel quoted Sudan's foreign ministry as saying the statements of senior Kenyan officials and the behavior of its government confirm that it adopts the positions of Rapid Support Forces RSF, shelters its members and provides them with various types of support. Kenya said it is yet to receive a formal communication of the rejection. IGAD appointed Mr. Ruto as the chairman of its delegation that also has representation from Ethiopia, South Sudan and Djibouti during the bloc summit on June the 12th. Mr. Ruto has been critical of the war in Sudan, once saying that the rival generals should stop the nonsense. He has met envoys of both the Sudanese army and RSF in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Well, Sudan's medical system has virtually been overwhelmed, with hospitals shutting doors and blood stocks running low as armed clashes between the two leading factions in the country's greater capital area escalated since mid-June. Fierce fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and rival rapid support forces has intensified, comprising Khartoum, Omdurman and Khartoum North. Since the conflict erupted mid-April, 59 of the 89 hospitals in Sudan's greater capital area have been forced to close their doors. For the remaining 30 hospitals, which are barely operational, some of their blood banks are battling supply shortages and have stopped services. The Al Now Hospital in southern Omdurman is the only operating hospital in the city and has been overwhelmed by a continuous influx of injured civilians. Let's go to Senegal, where it's wrestling or lamb evolved from a post-harvest pastime to the country's national sport. Anchored in ancestral war rituals, it blends physical combat and acrobatics, with victory marked by an opponent's back meeting the ground. Uzumi discovered the style during a trip to Senegal with Japan's aid agency in 2017. Similar cultures of hospitality, known as Tiranga in Senegal and Omotenashi in Japan, captivated him as well.
In a dusty alleyway surrounded by brick buildings, Japanese wrestler Shogo Uzumi lies face first on the Senegalese sand after having been thrown in the air by an oversized opponent. A moment's pause, then he rises, dusting off and rejoining the conclave of wrestlers wearing little more than lion clothes. Zomi left Tokyo behind and is now committed to mastering Senegalese wrestling and imparting his knowledge of the Olympic wrestling styles on those willing to learn. Every time I practice, I feel myself getting stronger. I feel a lot of joy and growth. Since relocating to Senegal full-time in 2022, Zomi has taken up residence with a community of wrestlers in Thiès, Senegalese third largest city. He has also set up an academy of 36 students who he is helping prepare for the 2026 Youth Olympics. At a national competition last month in St. Louis, Senegalese colonial capital, hundreds jostled for views as Uzomi and Badiena coached their wrestlers from the sidelines. One of their students even went home with a silver medal in her weight class.
And that's The World Today. Many thanks for watching. I'm Melissa Nwaka.